This week we're looking at number 5 in our series, looking at life everlasting on death, dying and the future hope. This one's entitled Resurrections Before the Cross. And of course, immediately we go to those resurrections performed by Jesus. We think of the widow of Nain's son, we think of Jairus' daughter, and we think, of course, the supreme example of Lazarus and the difference that made and the impact that made on that Jewish community so close to Jerusalem that it really brought about the end. And so many people were convinced about Jesus that those leaders, the Jewish leaders, not only wanted Jesus dead, but Lazarus as well, because he was living proof of Jesus's power of the resurrection. But there are, of course, examples, as we see in our study for today, of other resurrections. You see Moses and Elijah with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. There we have them conferring with Jesus, encouraging him. Moses, of course, representative of the law as given by God, not only on Mount Sinai, but throughout the wanderings of the Israelites through the wilderness and so on. And you have Elijah, representative of the prophets, who was taken up into heaven as, I suppose you could call, a resurrection. We don't know exactly how that works. And then we have some other resurrections that we don't really focus on very often. We have the widow of Zarephath's son raised by Elijah. You remember that. And then there's another one in 2 Kings 13, when Elijah, who already is dead, buried, when they come to bury another person, there's some raiders around and they actually throw the body quickly into Elijah's grave, and the man comes back to life, which is strange, isn't it? Elisha wasn't raised from the dead. He didn't experience resurrection, but the man who touched his bones was. Some questions for us to think about. But there certainly is the power of resurrection way before the experience of Jesus. And yet you would probably have to say that that is, I don't even want to say contingent on the resurrection of Jesus, but it is a demonstration of what happens in Jesus' new kingdom. In 1 Corinthians 15, we read about how we will all be raised, those who have fallen asleep in Jesus. And we find out that even the dead who are wicked are raised. So there's a great deal for us to think about. Because the resurrection was not so prominent in the Old Testament, you had two different parties by the time Jesus came along. You had the Pharisees who did believe in resurrection and the Sadducees who did not. So there was clearly some debate about how this really happened and what the reality was. If the Sadducees could deny it, they were reading the same text as the Pharisees. They were convinced that there was not. And Jesus told the Sadducees that they erred. They didn't know the power of God. And while not wishing to emphasize that the Pharisees were doing the right thing, at least they believed in the resurrection. And you remember that Paul stirred up controversy in the Sanhedrin when he was called before it by saying, I'm called here because of my belief in the resurrection of the dead. And of course, the Pharisees would support him and the Sadducees would say, no, that's completely wrong. And there was a great deal of controversy, which I think benefited Paul in that situation. So the question for us, as we look at it today, is to say, well, what does this whole concept of resurrection before the cross tell us? Well, it tells me that God is in the business of bringing us back to life. You remember the story of the parable, I suppose, of the dry bones that were brought back together. And that is clearly a parable of resurrection, that God can do this. Even though it's dry bones, he can put sinews and muscles and flesh back on it, and more importantly, actually make those people live again. So for me, I think the real encouragement is that God is in the resurrection business, if you like. Yes, we are going to die because of sin unless Jesus comes first, but we hold on to that hope, as I believe others did too, like Job. We've seen some of the other material about those who trusted, had hope in God, and know that I in my body, my physical body, not some ethereal spirit floating off when you die, in a resurrected body will see God face to face. What a wonderful hope. Let's share that as we talk about that this week.